Welcome to the All Access Entertainment Podcast. I'm your host, Joseph Bruen. A very special guest this week, wrestling historian and icon here in the New England area. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Tom Burke. Tom, thanks for joining us this week.
Thank you, Joe, for inviting me. I wish you a early Thanksgiving and an early Christmas, since this will be a broadcast probably just before Christmas. Thank you again, Joe. You have entered the hall several times here, what is called the Shrine, and I hope you can come back again after, because I'm doing a update on the memorabilia in my office.
Oh, excellent. Yeah, same to you for the holidays. Absolutely. And it's always been a pleasure seeing the shrine in person. And it's something special each and every time. And every time you see it, you notice something different that you didn't see last time. So I look forward to the new setup.
Yeah, Brian Solomon says something to me, having viewed other collections and everything. But he mentioned to me that my collection is an overall view of wrestling from like almost the 1920s to the present, and I'm more geared to the older school stuff. I kind of watch the stuff today for a little while, but I'm not into it that deep because I can't grasp it, to be honest with you. But it's what it is. It evolves, and if you want to call it evolution or de-evolution, maybe, but it's what it is today. You just deal with it.
Well, that's the thing. It's true history. There are so many pieces of history, and I have a passion and a love for the old school wrestling. So there's not enough of it out there. So I'm glad that you are one of the the figures that preserve it and keep it going.
Thank you.
And yeah, it's something that I think everybody should get a glimpse. If they haven't yet, get in contact with Tom if you're a big fan of old school wrestling in all eras. Really, he's got all kinds of stuff represented. And make an appointment because this is a shrine you don't want to miss.
Thank
Rewinding a
you.
little bit, Tom, into the early days, growing up as a kid, when did you first discover pro wrestling?
The first time I heard about pro wrestling was a Sunday morning. I was off to church, going to the 9 o'clock mass or whatever it was at that time. And I was in the sixth grade. And some of the guys I used to hang out with were outside the church before we went in, and they were all talking about wrestling, about this and that. And I said, "What are you talking about?" And this was on Channel 22 at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. This would have been 1958. And I said, "Oh, really? I got to check that out next Sunday, next Saturday." Next Saturday comes around, and Joe, I got bit. I could not, I could not leave. I was enthralled with it. And I looked in the TV guide, and I saw that there was wrestling at 11 o'clock at night. So on Channel 40 of Springfield, Channel 22 is the other station, and they carried wrestling Bedlam from Boston, which was a Paul Bowser promotion, Eddie Quinn. So, and the Chicago stuff was old Marigold Arena and International Amphitheater. So that was a different, and that was older. That was from the 50s. But I got so absorbed into it, it became my passion. And I'm happy I did because it opened up a whole new world for me, and I'm still active in it on a nostalgic end of it. And also the fact is, I've met so many wonderful people, yourself included. I've met wonderful people that were in the ring wrestling or as managers or whatever, and it it it, it ended up I met my heroes. Let's put it that way.
Sure. And at what point did you go to see your very first show in person? Do you remember that special
Yes,
event?
oh, absolutely. It was my Christmas gift from my dad, December 29th, 1959. So it was a year after I got the wrestling bug. He was on vacation that week, and we had wrestling on Wednesday nights at Holyoke, Mass, which, of course, was a no-no. My mother would never let me go out on a school night, and come back at 10:30 at night or 11 o'clock at night. My dad, you had to go to work at 5 a.m. So that was a no. But anyways, my Christmas gift for my dad in 1959 were tickets to a wrestling show in Holyoke at the Valley Arena, and I ended up meeting a number of those wrestlers that were on the card, and two of them we became friends over the years. Red Bastien and Wild Bull Curry.
Wow. So you first show right out the gate, you were already meeting the superstars.
Well, it's funny. Bull Curry wasn't on that schedule to be on the show. There was a bad snowstorm, and some of the wrestlers couldn't make it from wherever they were the night before. And Bull Curry was called by Eddie Quinn's brother, Bob Quinn, to fill in. And that is how I went to the show. And the Zebra Kid was on, George Bolus. And here's a
Oh yeah.
funny story. The first, the, I I had to utilize the facilities, and I didn't know where the hell to go. I saw, oh, that must be the men's room there. I walked in; it was the dressing room,
Oh,
and the Zebra Kid threw a boot at me. He said, "Get the hell out of here, kid." Well,
oh my
I finally met him in 1968 when I was in Germany, and I reminisced about that. He just laughed and everything, and I was a guest of Gusto Kaiser, the promoter, and we were talking about my service and everything. He asked me what I was doing after the show. I said I don't know. So we're going to go out for a beer. So that's what we did. So that's how it started. I well, not started, but that's how I met the Zebra Kid.
And when it comes to your private collection, it's kind of taken on a life of itself. We just spoke about it a little while ago. It's been a shrine, talked about as the shrine here in Massachusetts. Locally in New England, a huge part. People come from all over, fans, stars alike, to check out the Tom Burke Shrine. So tell us how that started. First of all, when did you
Oh,
start
gee.
getting so much stuff to the point where you're like, you know what? Let me turn this into an actual mini museum.
Well, that's a good question. Like any fan, you start from my era. You had two avenues. You had magazines, there were a couple of magazines at the time, and you also had newspaper clippings, ads from the newspapers or promos. So I started clipping those out in the from the newspaper. Then I went to the library because I was doing a history article on World War II or whatever. Yeah, it was World War II, and I had to go on the microfilm machine, and I'm going down and everything. And you had to crank and everything. Today it's all automotive, but and then I said, "Gee, I wonder if there's any wrestling." And there was, sure enough, there were wrestling clippings on this microfilm. So I wrote all that stuff down, and that started it. And I still have them, and I wouldn't trade it anything. I'm after before earlier this morning, or I should say this afternoon, I was at the library working on a project. I'm going to be posting it on my Facebook page tomorrow for November 7th. And there was a local wrestling show. I'm going to post that. So, but it's fun, and it's history. And I was very fortunate in getting to meet an old time wrestler who he wrestled in the 30s. He was also a semi pro baseball player, Al Mercer. And he wrestled all over here in New England and Canada. And I just acquired a program from him of him wrestling in Kansas City back in 1933, I think, or 34. But anyways, we used to have a column in the newspaper, uh, and it would be 25 years, 30 years, and they would pinpoint various things going on in the Springfield area from that year, 25 years, 30 years ago. So in 1964, there was a tidbit about Al Mercer winning some New England championship, blah blah blah, and they said he was from Springfield. So I said, "Gee, I wonder if he's still around." So there's no internet. So I get home, I take out the phone book. Oh, there's three Mercers. So which one's which? Well, his first name was Al. So I saw, well, I see the A Mercer. So I called and I said, a woman answered. I said, hello, I would like to speak to Al Mercer, the former wrestler. And she says to me, oh, this is his wife. He's not home. He's in a hospital. But, I said, oh, what hospital? And it ended up being the hospital right next to my high school. And I said to her, do you think it would be all right if I visited him? I think he would enjoy that. So, anyways, I went to visit him, and it was a great visit and interview. And we kept in touch over the years. When I was in a service, he would drop me a line and everything. And then when I met some of the other old timers, I would drop his name, and that opened doors with them. So
Nice.
it
It
was
was
a
like a
good,
chain
it was,
reaction.
yeah, exactly. So it was all good.
And you've had a great
So, and then,
correspondence. Oh, go ahead.
oh, I had a great question with a lot of people. Well, with Lou Thesz, Danny Hodge, and a whole host of others. And I've been very fortunate. I have had I had an incident at a high school reunion, and one of the guys who, shall we say, we weren't buds. He's always
Right.
making wisecracks, and he comes up and he says, "Hey, Burke, you still there doing that wrestling crap?" And I looked at him. I said, "You know something? I just had lunch with Bob Backlund. Have you ever had lunch with your hero, Ted Williams?" And then he told me to go f off. So I had the last laugh.
Right. Yeah, and it's true. And you've done exactly that. What are your memories of the great Don Leo Jonathan?
Oh, absolutely fantastic. I met Don Leo when he was wrestling for Grand Prix in out of Montreal, and they ran shows in Burlington, Vermont once a month, and I used to go up there. And when I met him the first time, we were talking, and I dropped his father's name. I said, "How was it growing up with your dad and being a wrestler as well?" And he was kind of looked at me, surprised that I knew his dad was a wrestler, brother Jonathan. So we started talking and everything, and then it evolved with storytelling me and Billy Two Rivers. This was in the dressing room in the auditorium in Burlington, Vermont. He was sitting next to him, and he started telling stories. So it was a riot. I mean, they were both laughing and joking about guys that they encountered over the years. I was totally privileged, but it
Sure.
was fun.
And what's some of the history that you can kind of bring the fans in on as far as BoBo Brazil goes, the man with the cocoa butt?
Well, when I was involved in Ring Wrestling Magazine, I did a series of historical articles, and one of them was on the history of black wrestlers. And Bobo, of course, was one of them that was featured, out of Green Bay. Was it good? No, Benton Harbor. Was it Benton Harbor? Yeah, I'm getting a senior moment here. Benton Harbor, right? And he was one of the stars of the transition. He, Bearcat Wright, but going back to black wrestlers in the 1930s, right in our home area, Boston, there were two basically running promotions runnings. Paul Bowser was the main one, and Charlie Gordon was running as well. Charlie even ran and his what program was not a fly by night. He promoted a couple of shows in Fenway Park, but he had a black wrestler, Salim Samara, who was the first black man to hold a version of the world title back in 1933, 34. So I never met him. I would have loved to have sat down and talked to him. And but getting back to what your question about BoBo Brazil, he was a major star. And if you look at results, even though he wasn't on the circuit, they would always bring him in to Baltimore when it was a WWF or Tri WF. Even though he was around, they would fly him in because he was such a draw to the black community. I always found that fascinating.
And moving on to, some prominent figures in the world of pro wrestling, of course, on a promoter scale, Vince McMahon Sr. and Vince McMahon Jr., obviously with the WWF and, of course, World Wrestling Federation, which became WWE. What do you think the differences are between the two? And what are your interactions with the two over the years? How have they been?
I met Vince the Elder once, and that was when I was living and working in New York City, and I had press credentials for Madison Square Garden because I was with Ring Magazine. And he was there. Went up and extended a hello and told her that Nat Lube from Ring Magazine told me to say hello. He thanked me, and that was the only connection I had with him. With the son, Vince the younger, I met him twice. Once was at Titan Towers. I was there with Ross Hart. Ross was visiting me, and we went down to Titan Towers because the Harts just donated a whole the Stampede Library to WWE or WWF at the time. So we were there, and I forgot who. Tommy Dreamer was our guy taking us around the building and everything. And Vince walked by, stopped, and said he recognized Ross. He said hello to Ross, and Ross introduced me. Just hello, how are you? Blah blah blah, and all that. Then I met him again at a Cauliflower Alley event in New Jersey, maybe maybe about 4 years later. He came. He was being honored by CAC then. That's the only interaction I ever had with Vince the younger.
And as far as the library goes for Stampede Wrestling, it started to be released on WWE 24/7 many years ago, and then it got pulled. Is there a reason that you are aware of that we haven't seen that
I I
library?
I I didn't even know it was pulled. I'm surprised at that.
Yeah, they were just, they started releasing weekly episodes, and then all of a sudden it just kind of came to a halt. And now that they have different versions of the network, Peacock, and it's never been
Yeah,
brought back. So,
really. And I assume that also with other tape libraries that they have purchased. Is
yeah,
that
there are
correct?
some others. Yeah, there are others that you just haven't seen yet, unfortunately. But there are a lot to choose from on there. But that is one of them that,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah,
strangely
I
enough.
would love to. Yeah, that's strange because there is that element of fans that would love to see that, and even as a commercial venture, well, you don't have VCRs now, but other methods, disc or whatever, that they could produce, or I don't know if that's possible.
And you mentioned the CAC, the Cauliflower Alley Club. Why don't you tell us about your experiences there over the years, what they're all about, and what they stand for?
Well, the Cauliflower Alley Club was started in 1965 with Mike Mazurki and several other old time wrestlers and boxers. And it was based out of California. And at that point of time, if you were not working in the business of boxing or wrestling or show business as well, you were not a member. You had to be sponsored by a active member of the club to be accepted. I was extremely fortunate that I was granted admission to the club. And this is when Mike Mazurki was still president. And the gentleman who sponsored me was he was a boxer slash wrestler from California, and he was never a major star, but he was very influential with the club. And I ended up getting the nod to be a member. Well, years started, and then Mike passed away, and Lou Thesz took over as president. And I had known Lou and had a relationship with Lou. So Lou and I were talking one day on the phone, and I for some reason he said, "What would you like to do, Tom?" I said, "You know, I'd like to get on the board of the CAC." He says, "Well, next time someone dies, you're on the board." A month a month later, he calls me up, says, "So and so passed away. You're in." So
Uh,
that's
and that was the door. It opened up right away for you.
it opened up, and I was on the board for I guess about 6 years and everything. And then things changed. Health issues with my mom, and I wasn't going to CAC and everything. And I'm going to go to CAC this coming 2026 in August. Myself and a couple of the other local guys there. You know, two of them, Wade Collins and Marsha McNeil. They'll
Oh
be
yeah.
going out to CAC, and Mike D and Chris McMahon. No relation, but we're going to go
Excellent.
out.
Well, why don't you tell the fans some of the different things that you've done in the business, all the different
Oh,
duties that you've had.
well, I've done. I have a spreadsheet of different things I've done. As I mentioned, I was writing for the magazines. I started writing for ring wrestling while I was still in high school, and I wrote for Wrestling Review and a couple of the other magazines. But Ring Rust was my favorite because the philosophy of that magazine was unlike the Victory Sports magazines. And the best part of Victory was the photography was totally awesome. But I'm going to wrestle this guy and throw him off the Empire State Building. That wasn't my forte. I like the history of the business, how a guy might have developed his character, etc. Well, and I did that. I ended up booking some talent from the Kowalski promotions in Japan. I sent three guys in Japan, also to South Africa. And when Lou Thez was doing a tour of the Middle East, Dubai and some other country, and he called me up and he wanted to get something, a novelty. And I said, I got this Indian guy, American type Indian, but he was a Bobby Cortez who wrestled as Chief White Feather. So he went on the tour. So I did that, and and then I did my own wrestling stint as a manager, Ludwig von Speicher, for a couple of independent guys and everything. But that never, I had a full time job. I didn't want to go and be on food stamps. Let's put it that way.
Sure.
But it was good. And I've done. I had a radio show with the late Dan Riley, Wrestle Talk, and and various other things, but I uh I wouldn't change it for the world, to be honest with you.
You've accomplished so much in the world of wrestling and been such a dedicated, pinpoint person to not only the New England scene but wrestling as a whole. And it's greatly appreciated on many levels. So we certainly thank you for that.
Thank you.
Keeping pro wrestling alive. Now you mentioned Lou Thez, the late great Lou Thez, a couple times now. For the fans that aren't familiar with Lou Thez, why don't you give us some history on Lou?
Oh geez, Lou. Lou was a premier wrestling wrestler. All good. He could get in the ring and wipe the ring with his opponent. He was NWA champion several, I think it was 6 times, and he was a individual. If you showed respect uh, to wrestling in general, he accepted you. You know, and that's how it developed. And we had a we had a wonderful time when CAC ran here in Springfield. He came over the house with Red Bastien and Carl von Hess.
Oh,
And you know, as you recall, my friend, I have a guest book, and people signed the guest book.
sure.
Luther signed it. Red Bastien signed it. Carl von Hess, God bless him, I love the guy, stayed in gimmick and would not sign the book.
Oh, there's always
However,
that one, right?
that's fine with that was fine with me. But I don't know if you know Dr. Bob Breiler. Are you familiar with him?
Yeah, absolutely.
When he approached the clerk at the hotel and gave him a 20 spot to get Carl von Hess's registration card.
Oh,
So he got that. He's probably the only person I know that's got an autograph by Carl von Hess.
wow. That's a rare one,
But
right?
that's great. Stuff like that. It's just great. He's
Now,
a
an
doctor. He could
interesting,
afford $20.
yeah, an interesting character is somebody who has passed on, but very entertaining, very interesting man. He would call me often. I think we actually connected thanks to you, and his name is Professor Elliot Marin. Why don't you give us some
Professor L.
details on the
Oh,
professor?
Professor was an ace of a guy. Uh, now this is what he told me. I don't know if this is true. He told me that he saved all of his messages from his answering machine when you had a tape deck that you had to put in and
Yeah.
everything. He said he has that from Vince Senior, Vince Junior, Arnie Skolin, etc. Uh, he was a employee of MSG at events and everything as an usher or whatever. He got involved. He was a big wrestling guy. He would be the escort of the wrestlers to and from the ring. And he did a talk show. I believe he did a talk show on a local radio station out of New York. He was a good guy. Sad to say he passed away. He really got sad to say very sick. He had sugar diabetes and other things, but he was a good guy. He would call me up and we would just blab and blab, you know. But he was good. He was very secretive about wrestling at times. I'd question him about something. I can't talk about that. But you know, I respected that, you know, because that's how it was back then, you know. But he was a good guy. He was friends with Ernie Roth, the Grand Wizard, and Captain Lou. They were very good friends. But he was an individual who uh, was always around, you know. And one of his jobs was, and I don't know the time element, I imagine it was in the 70s. He would have to take he would go to the office, the Holland Hotel where Arnie Scolin's office was, and Arnie would give him the tapes to take to I don't know what channel, my WOR or whatever TV station it was that was telecasting the WWF wrestling. So he was their delivery boy per se. But
Okay.
I
Yeah.
thought that was interesting.
Yeah. Professor Elliot, he would call the house maybe once every month or two, and he'd always have trivia questions.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
He was a true man of trivia, and I always enjoyed that. A lot of it was well before my time, so I would often not, have all of the answers correct, but he was always
Yeah,
fun to talk to.
he was a good guy. I miss him. He's a true care and a real New Yorker.
Yeah. And what are your memories on Mr. Gorgeous George and maybe some of the history on him?
My personal memory, he was on the second wrestling show that I ever attended. That would have been in January 1960. I think it was January 15th, 1960 at the Springfield Auditorium. So Gorgeous George, often imitated but never duplicated. That sign, that saying refers to a lot of wrestlers, but he was the original showman. And you have to you think about Gorgeous George. His prominence came in after World War II, especially with the avenue of TV being introduced. And you consider the time frame. You have GIs coming home. We just won World War II, defeating Germany and Nazi Germany and the Empire of Japan. And you have this flamboyant guy running around. And of course, that irks a lot of people because they had assumed that he was of a, what we would say today, a gay nature, gay, but he wasn't, of course. But that elevated him to be a top heel, and that generated throughout his career. And there were so many wrestlers that picked up on that style and also the name. There were a couple Gorgeous Georges after that: Gorgeous Junior, Gorgeous George Allen, Gorgeous George Rogers, etc. Not any relation, no, Buddy Rogers. So that's something which is good. Flattery is always the greatest imitation. Imitation is the greatest tribute to flattery. But
Right.
he was good. I would have. Of course, when I saw him, he was on on the downfall of his career. Because he died 3 years later, right? A month after Kennedy died.
Oh, okay. Wow. So another staple here in the New England scene, Walter Killer Kowalski, one of the true greats, one of the great heels in pro wrestling history. What kind of history can you give us on Walter Killer Kowalski?
Wow. Well, he was on my first. He was on my second wrestling show I went to here in Springfield. He was in the main event. I hated Kowalski because I was a big fan of Pat O'Connor, a fine Irish lad.
Oh, yes.
Well, as years progressed, I found out who the real heel was in personal one to one, and who was the baby face. The baby face was Walter Kowalski. O'Connor was a heel. Very. This was. I can only talk of my interaction with him. I found him to be very cold, very standoffish, whereas Kowalski was just total opposite. There was an organization called the Wrestling Fans International Association, and we would have annual conventions. When the convention was held in Pittsburgh in 1969, the local promoter, and Bruno was influential in this. I guess he was part of the office. So they did not want the wrestlers to mix with the fans. They had to keep it totally kayfabe. Only two wrestlers showed up: Kowalski and Tony Marino, aka the Batman, showed up. And when I had mentioned this to Kowalski years later, and he says, "Nobody's going to tell me what I can do when I'm off the mat." You know, so
Right.
and Walter and I had a wonderful relationship. Uh, a great friendship. He would come over to the house here whenever he was in the Springfield area. We he, my dad was in the Veterans Hospital. He and another individual, Mel Simons,
Oh, yes.
they came over. They visited my dad, and Mel went back out to his car. They got the accordion and played a number of tunes for the patients at the VA, which is Walter was singing. It was funny. No, Walter was an ace. He was a as Nick Bockwinkel said, he was full of energy. He was like what's that? There was a commercial with the energy bunny or something like that, and that
Yeah.
was Kowalski. He was boom, boom, boom all the time. Of course, he passed away and uh, about 10 years ago now. I guess it's now about that, maybe more. And his he was a vegetarian, as we all know, for many, many years. But I think that my relationship with Walter was a unique thing because I hated him when I was 12, and I loved him when I was 20.
Exactly. It's funny how it works. And
Exactly.
and a legendary spot, back in the day here in New England, North Attleboro, Massachusetts, Jack Witchy's Sports Arena. What kind of memories do you have of Jack Witchy's Sports Arena?
Oh, I went to Jack Witchy's probably about a half a dozen times, maybe 10 times. What interested me about Jack Witchy's was when you entered the hall, there was a gallery of photos, and the promotion at that time was WWF. But the pictures on the wall were from the Tony Santos promotions and the Paul Bowser promotions. And I found that fascinating. And of course, I don't know whatever happened to that uh, collection they had, because if I recall, correct me if I'm wrong, didn't the Witchies burn down?
It did, yes.
Yeah. And I wonder if they were able to salvage photos before, or do they just become dust? But that
Right,
was,
there's not much out.
but yeah, yeah, there was, yeah, I loved Jack Witch. It was an old time. Angelo Savoti told me something one time. We were talking, and he said we would never give up Witchies because it's a sellout every Friday.
Yeah.
And I thought that was interesting.
And how many people did they hold there for a show, roughly?
What's that, Joe?
How many people did they hold per show there, roughly, crowd-wise?
Joe, I didn't hear you. What did you say?
Oh, the attendance, how many people could you get in there?
Oh, at Witchies?
Yeah.
Witchy? Probably about, I would say, probably four or 500.
Okay, yeah. All right.
It was a small venue, but they packed them in. Maybe it was more than that. I'm not sure, but you know, I remember we went there one time. Kowalski and I and Mel Simons, and this was not at a show. This was and Rocky Tomeo was there. Jan Nelson, and they were wrestling, and Kowalski was taking pictures. There was somebody else too. I can't remember who the other guy was, and because Kowalski was going to do a brochure on how to wrestle, and the guys were there, and Rocket Tomato was excellent. And he even commented with Kowalski. He said, "You don't do this at the shows now." He says, "They don't want me to do this stuff," because he was doing all kinds of acrobatic stuff, like a rocka, you know. But I
Right,
thought that
right.
was very interesting.
And what are your memories of Lord Alfred Hayes?
I only met Hayes once, and that was when I was traveling and I was in St. Louis. and I liked the character he had. I thought he was a very good wrestler. Of course, he's from England, and he wrestled. Oh, I take that back. I saw him wrestle at Royal Albert Hall in 1967 when I went to England on leave. So, and I can't think who he wrestled. But anyways, yeah, he was good. I liked him. I would have loved to have sat down and talked to him for less because I was able to do that with Billy Robinson
Oh,
when
yes.
I met Billy Robinson when he was inducted into the Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame when it was in Amsterdam, New York, and I had met Billy three times before. I met him in the first time I met him was in 67 in Manchester, England. I met him in Cologne, Germany in 68. And then I met him in '69 again, and then I met him at the CC, but I met him at the Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame when it was upstate New York, and it was it was great because we weren't talking wrestling AWA or NWA. We were talking about wrestling in Europe and about different guys. The greatest match I ever saw was Billy Robinson and a Hungarian wrestler named Gideon Gaida. It was so realistic. It had me on the edge of my seat. It was no music, nothing like that. It was one hold after another. It was phenomenal. And when I told Billy, he said Gita was one heck of a wrestler and one strong ox.
And speaking of Ox, another fixture in pro wrestling history, the late great Ox Baker. Your memories of Ox?
Oh, yes, Ox. I first met Ox at Don Wilson's house in St. Louis. He was on the St. Louis card. He and Dewey Robinson were at the house. Ox was great. I loved him. He loved to talk wrestling. And over the years, I would see him off and on. Of course, and then eventually he moved here to New England. But a little side note about Ox: his family ran a huge farm in Iowa, and he was their only son. And when they passed away, he inherited the property and sold it for a big bundle. But Ox was a good guy. I liked Ox. As years progress, he did his gimmick and everything. Remember, he was on that Price is the Right show, and all that. He was a good
Yeah.
guy. You know, he couldn't wrestle with a damn, but he was a character, and he knew
Now,
it. He knew that's what the word is. He knew his place in wrestling, and and that was a key factor with people who think they're better than the other guy and they're not, and they
right.
know their niche, and he knew where his niche was.
Sure. Everybody has a certain strong point.
Exactly.
Yeah. Now, how about the unpredictable Johnny Rods? What's the history on Johnny that you could tell the fans?
Oh, well, Raj was just inducted into the new International Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame out of Albany, New York. Rods is a product of getting into the business back in the '60s. I think he might have even started with Argentina Rocca had the World Booking Office promotion in about 63. But Raj was the enforcer for Vince. Eventually he got involved in wrestling. He's one tough guy, and I haven't seen Johnny in years, but I would have loved to have seen him a couple months ago when he was up in New York.
Yeah. Now, 2011, rewinding back a little bit, you were inducted into the New England Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame. Why don't you tell us about
Yes,
that
I was.
experience and a little bit about that day,
Oh,
maybe your
that was a
memories?
Well, the powers of be called me up and asked me if I'd like to be inducted. I said, "How much do I get paid?" They said, "We'll buy you pizza." And I says, "Fine, thank you." But no, no pepperoni because I get heartburn. So
Right.
seriously though, that was a treat. I sincerely appreciated it, and I wish that the Hall of Fame would we're just continuing that. I'll be able to attend an event in the near future, this coming year, if it doesn't conflict with any other travel plans I have. But overall, I thought it was a great honor, and saw so many people that I haven't seen in years. It was a lot of fun, and thank you, Joe, for doing that.
Oh, absolutely. It's it's an honor to have you a part of. You're a big part of wrestling history, and it should be recognized.
Thank you.
So moving on to another arena here in the New England area, the Boston Garden, the old Boston Garden. Why don't you give us some memories on that?
The the old Boston Garden.
Yeah.
You're done. I attended a number of matches at the old Boston Garden. Um, I'm trying to think. There was an incident with a fan running into the ring, and Blackjack, I'm pretty sure it was Blackjack Mulligan, stood or moved the Grand Wizard aside because the guy was after the Grand Wizard and ended up stabbing Mulligan.
Oh, okay.
That's back in the 70s. And then after that incident, the managers were not on, as I recall, were not on the road. They would only do TV tapings or MSG.
Okay. Wow.
Now, that's my memory. I may be wrong on that because I do have a failing memory. So, but I think that's what happened.
Well, there's a
But
lot of
getting
information
back to the
about
garden, yeah, getting back to the garden, it was like a litany of wrestling matches and champions that appeared at the garden over decades. I would have loved to have been there to see Danny O'Mahony, Steve Crusher Casey, guys of that era wrestling. But sad to say, didn't make it. I
right.
wasn't even around then.
Yeah, exactly. Now, how about, hardcore wrestling obviously was, pretty big time, put on the map mainstream with ECW. But years prior to that, you saw guys like the original Sheik, you saw the Sheep Herders, you saw Abdullah the Butcher. Why don't you talk about the early days of hardcore wrestling?
Well, the original hardcore guy was Wild Bull Curry,
Right.
and everybody has elevated that style to an extreme position. I'm not crazy over that, to be honest. Like Bull sort of said to me, you use it at a particular time during the match as you build it up. You just don't go in there right away, boom, boom, boom. You build it up and then do it and everything. Today, it's they start crashing chairs right away over the heads of guys. I don't care for that. But they have a niche, I guess. But I think what it is it's a mirror of society, how society is today. You look at some of the stuff that's on TV or music and rap and all this. It's a violent thing, and that fitted into the mode that younger people, a segment like. It's not my style at all.
Sure. Now, who would you say, if you had to choose one, who was the most influential ever to do it?
Hardcore.
No, just wrestling in general.
Geez. Are you talking about making it believable?
Yeah, just kind of really,
I, I, I would say Danny Hodge.
Danny Hodge. Okay.
Yeah,
What memories can
yeah.
you give us of Danny?
Oh, an ace of a guy and a real sweetheart. Uh, he was an Olympian, and he was a true advocate of wrestling and a guy you don't want to fool around with and everything if you got smart in the ring with him. Uh, but he's the guy who was homespun in Perry, Oklahoma. And he was, he traveled somewhat, but not a lot and everything. But he was a guy who was gifted and respected within the framework of the business. I think that we need people like him today. With his style is, probably would, you know yourself, Joe. You're at the matches and they start really wrestling. Boring, boring. They
Right.
want to see. They want to see blood and guts. They want to see nonsense. I mean, I just can't deal with that.
Sure. Now, another legend in the world of pro wrestling. Let's talk about Ed the Strangler Lewis, the history on Ed.
Oh, well, I got two stories to tell you about Ed Strangler Lewis. Let me get to the. Let me get to the a unique story that Lou Thesz told me.
Sure.
As you know, uh, Ed Strangler Lewis was in some place in Oklahoma, right up in Tulsa, and he was dying, and he was in a veterans hospital. Lou Thesz, because he used to be Lou Thesz's manager, legitimate manager, and Lou went to visit him. As Lou visited him, as he walked out of the room down the hall, who's coming by to visit the Strangler was world famous wrestling promoter Jack Pfeffer. And Lou says they greeted each other, and Pfeffer says, "I've come to pay my respects to the old man." So Pfeffer is one of my idols. To be, I just love the guy.
Oh,
But
wow. Yeah.
anyways, getting back to Ed Strangler Lewis, he was an individual who was a strong-headed, muscular guy in the sense of his built and everything, and was a real wrestler. When he got out of wrestling, he did a couple businesses. He had a steakhouse in California. He also did. I think he was also involved during World War II of training troops of some sort because he passed away at a VA hospital. But he was. I would have loved to have met him and sat down and talked. Of course, he was blind at the end. Sad to say, but he was an individual I would love to have sat down and talk to. Uh, I had mentioned to you about Jack Pfeffer.
Yes.
There's an individual named Corey Santos, no relation to the Santos family, who is working on a biography on Jack Pfeffer. And I can't wait for that book. To be honest with you, I've had the honor and the privilege of visiting the University of Notre Dame in South Bend, Indiana, and seeing the archives of the Jack Pfeffer collection there, which is totally amazing. This past summer, myself, my local friend Chris McMahon, no relation, Bobby Fulton, and Jim Cornette we spent 4 days at Notre Dame going over the archives.
Oh, that's great.
Jim Cornette was like a little kid in a candy shop. He was totally enthralled. And I've known Jim, God, since 1979, 78, and he's a good guy, very historian, a major historian on wrestling. He was in heaven. He really was. Make all kinds of notes and everything, taking pictures, but good guy.
Jim Cornette, another person who has just a massive collection of pro wrestling memorabilia, and he worked for me in 2015 at the convention center in Providence, Rhode
I know.
Island, and he
Let me
spoke very
let me,
highly of you, and he spoke
let
very
me tell
highly
you
of your
about that.
collection.
Let me tell you about that. That's funny. I'm walking. I'm walking around with Nick Curry, and Jim was at his table signing autographs. He saw me. He left his table, walked down to say hello to me, give me a shake hands, a big hug, and we started talking for a little while. And I said,
Yeah.
Jim, you got a line there. I said, they can wait. So, yeah,
Well,
Jim's
that
good
shows you the
people.
respect that he had for you, you know?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Jim's good people. Good people. I totally. I'm matter of fact, I just got his book. Uh, My Friends and Heroes, or Heroes and Friends. He just did, but he's a good guy. He's got plans to do a book on Jackie Fargo. That was his all-time hero when he was a kid.
Oh, wow, okay, so we can expect that.
Yeah, I would say probably not immediate, probably another couple of years, I imagine.
Now, what's your favorite era of pro wrestling? You've been a part of so many different
Oh,
eras.
that's you know what, I have to take that and I have to divide it up because different eras have special meanings for me. Let me go back to the 70s. The 70s is when things really opened up for me on a professional level. I was working for Ring magazine. I had press passes for WWF events and IWA when they came in 1976. But what it was that when I was visiting my family in Rutland, Vermont, there was a show coming up there, which I knew about, was the Grand Prix promotion. So I contacted the local promoter, Ira Blow, and he invited me to the show, and that was a niche. And I found myself being drawn up there for their monthly cards rather than MSG, because MSG, you had an entourage of people like Bill Apter, George Napolitano, Frankie Amato, other people from all these other magazine sources and everything. And it was I could not find my niche there, to be honest with you. Whereas when I started going to Vermont, and I worked for Trailways Bus Lines at the time, I was a dispatcher, and I have free trans on Vermont Transit to go up to any point on their route. So I would just hop on a bus, visit my relatives in Rutland, and then head up to Burlington for the shows, or Rutland if they ran Rutland. So that was my niche. And that is where I established myself, made friends with a number of the wrestlers. And it also is the fact is that they weren't getting the publicity on a nationwide focus. So that was a draw. It was a two-way street. It was a draw for me to go up there, but it also an opportunity for them to get some ink in Ring magazine.
And why don't you give us some of the history on the Professor Roy Shire?
I'm laughing because I met him at CAC. I was introduced to him by Cora Combs. And I was sitting with Cora and her daughter Debbie, and Roy Shires came over. He sat down with us. She introduced me to him, and we made introductions, and we're talking and everything, and just having a good time. And a guy comes up to Shires and made a remark about Pat Patterson, and in regards to Patterson's sexuality. And Shires looks at us, I don't know what you're talking about, which I thought was hilarious, to be honest with you. But that's the only interaction I have had with Roy Shires. But I just thought that's fine. And the guy walked away, and he turned around and looked at of course, what a jerk. He said something else too, but I won't repeat it.
Right. How about the destroyer, Dick Beyer?
Oh, what an ace of a guy. He was totally old school, loved wrestling, and I was a member of his fan club back in the '60s when I was still in high school, and I can't remember who ran the club. Was it Jeff Walton? Jeff Walton ran the Freddie Blassie fan club. I'm having a mental block here. Who ran the fan club for the Destroyer? But I was a member, and I had mentioned that to him at a CAC event, and that kind of triggered a memory, and it triggered a friendship and everything. So he was good. We would talk on the phone every once in a while. He
Now
was
you mentioned
good.
the fan clubs. You had Dick Beyer, you had Freddie Blassie, you had Bruno Sammartino. The fan club days have kind of gone, by the wayside. They don't have that anymore. Why do you think the fan clubs went away?
Oh, because I think the way wrestling changed overall, everything changed in what 83 no 83, 84, 85. With cable and the access to the guys. The shows got homogenized. Local promotion stopped, and it wasn't there. And I think it was a mindset by the promoters, namely Vince, the younger, wanted total control over his product
Sure.
and not access to the guys in that form.
Yeah.
I don't. There are no fan clubs around today at all that I'm aware of.
No, I
In,
don't think so.
in any venue, in any vague, there used to be fan clubs for singers, actors, etc. All that's gone.
Yeah. Well, it was nice while it lasted, and
Oh, it was great.
it was a more intimate, kind of gave you a more intimate level on
Yeah, yeah.
things.
I had my own fan club, um, All Star Wrestling, back in the '60s when I was in high school. And it was just results. And I would go to. I had a unique situation here in Springfield. All the high schools, the public high schools, were all close to each other, within a walking distance, and the main public library was right there. So we'd have to walk by. I would walk down with my friends from class when the school ended, and I was excuse myself. I would go to the library and go to the periodical room and look at all the newspapers from out of state and within New England as well. And I had my little notebook and making notes and results, etc., which I use for my newsletter. So I'm looking at the Toronto Globe and Mail, and Lou Thesz beats Buddy Rogers for the title. I said, "Oh shit!" So, well, the library goes, "Shh, we don't use that language here,"
Right.
you know. So,
That's great.
but
That's classic.
but yeah, it's fun. That's a classic. But that was how it was. I mean, I just loved it. You know, but it's all good stuff. And getting back to the subject matter of fan clubs, the wrestlers utilized those knowing that this was something which was free publicity for them, you know, and some wrestlers were very respondent. Bobby Shane was one, and he had a fan club. Diane Devine ran it, and he would send her results, and he'd answer letters, etc. You know, questions. She would send him, and he would answer it on in the bulletin. You know, so you know that was good.
Now let's
So
talk
it
a little
became.
bit about your. Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, let's talk a little bit about your collection. Now, at one point, the WWE contacted you about using some posters or purchasing some posters. Why
Yes,
don't we
they
talk
did.
about that?
I had acquired a poster of Bruno Sammartino wrestling Freddie Blassie in the main event, MSG. Ben Brown, who's the archivist for WWE, had had been in my house and seen it a number of times. And when they were doing Bruno's induction into the WWE Hall of Fame, they wanted that. So we discussed it on the phone. They came up. We negotiated a price, and they got it.
Wow.
Do I regret it? Not really.
Yeah. So is that in their archives now? Basically, is that in their warehouse?
I don't know if it's in the warehouse or it's in display in the Titan Towers. I'm not sure.
Gotcha. Now, when it comes to
I
tag
mean,
team,
going back to one thing, the warehouse. I've never been to the warehouse, but from what I've been told, it's massive with all the artifacts from the current time period to the past.
wow.
You know, but I know my friend John Piantozzi had been there when he sold a number of things to the WWE, and they met at the warehouse. And John was telling me they had the caskets for the Undertaker and Paul Bearer and other things. You know, just good stuff. You know.
Yeah, yeah. They even have the WrestleMania 1 ring there as well.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's in. It's not put together, but it's there. So tag team wrestling, it's kind of a lost art. You don't see it as often now. It became prominent many years ago. You had tag teams like Jack and Jerry, the Briscoes, of course, the Blackjacks, Lanza, Mulligan. You had the Mongols early on. You
Yeah.
had the fabulous Kangaroos. Why don't you tell us about some of the early tag teams in pro wrestling?
Well, when I was doing uh, the history of tag teams for Ring Wrestling magazines, I had a hard time pinpointing when tag teams started. So I contacted by letter Paul Bosch because he was a promoter in Houston, but he also was a lover of wrestling history. So he ended up writing me a letter, as his recollection was that tag teams started in, I think it was 1937 in Oregon, and it was called team wrestling. And then it developed tag team with the tag rope and etc. and everything. But I like tag teams. My favorite tag teams while I was growing up were the Bastine brothers, Lou and Red, the Brunetti brothers, Guy and Joe, and of course on the other side of the fence you had the heels, Mr. Moto and Mr. Moto. And this is getting back to my time watching TV.
Yep.
I can't remember who the Japanese guys were wrestling, but they were doing them in like anything. And then They jumped out of the ring. They undid the canvas, rolled up one of the guys, and was pounding on him. And Mark Lewin and Don Curtis run in to make the save. But all good stuff. And of course
Right.
everybody's in outrageous. They're crazy, and everything, but all fun.
Well, tag team wrestling just adds that extra element of fun, you know?
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
So, a legendary family based out of New England here. We touched on Wild Bull Curry. Let's talk about that family. Of course, the Rocket Fred Curry, Flying Fred Curry, his father, and of course, Nick Curry, the youngest member of the wrestling family. Tell us your memories of the Curry family.
Oh, geez. It goes way, way back. I first met Bull to speak to. No, we might take that back. My memory's foggy here. He was at a wrestling show in Holyoke in 64 or 65. I was friends with the ring announcer, Tom Mortimer, who was an older man who happened to be an ex wrestler on independent circuit in New England back in the 40s. He was good friends with Bull, and I asked him if I could get an autograph with Bull Curry. I had a photo, so I'll take care of it for you. They went in, Bull signed it and everything. So moving forward to some point in the 70s, maybe 73, we had the WFIA convention in Detroit, and Bull Curry was being honored with the Ring Wrestling Magazine Wrestler of the Year. How that happened, I have no idea. But anyways, the I met Bull, shook hands with him, and we chit chatted for a while. And again, I dropped the name of an old timer, Al Mercer, I spoken about earlier. And oh yeah, blah blah blah. Well, you tell him I said hello and all this, and so we were talking about something, and I mentioned something. He said, "Oh, you have a copy of that?" I said, "Yeah." Well, here's my address. Please send me a copy. So it was a newspaper article I had, and I sent it to Bull, and we started corresponding and calling each other. And he was a good guy. That was my. And then, of course, that trickled down to the family. Rocket, of course, excelled on the local scene here in New England. Wrestling had changed, of course. The youngest son, Nick, had wrestled for a while, and now he's into MMA.
Oh, yes.
And
And
while
how about
he was in high school. He was a very good high school wrestler and a college wrestler.
And how about the history of some of the phrases in pro wrestling that maybe current fans aren't familiar with? Kind of, heels, baby faces, kayfabe.
Right. Yeah.
Why don't
Okay.
you give us a
Well,
little history of that?
well, wrestling had a secret language. Heels being bad guys, of course, villains. Baby faces being heroes or good guys. And kayfabe was if you were, say, two wrestlers are talking to each other, and a fan walks by, one of the guy was a kayfabe, meaning to shut your mouth, be quiet, don't let anything out. You know, and that is not prevalent today because everybody knows what's going on. Basically, I guess I don't
Right,
follow it today, so I may be totally off.
right. Well, arguably one of the biggest celebrity moments in pro wrestling. Why don't you talk to us about Jerry Lawler, Andy Kaufman on the David Letterman show?
Oh, again, this was a niche. And there's several stories about Kaufman's involvement in wrestling. I've heard two of them. One is that he was involved through the efforts of Bill Apter, which Apter had said. I had also been told that um, he Kaufman approached Vince Senior to get involved in it, and Vince suggested his ideal spot would be Memphis. So that's that. I don't know which story is real or what. They're gone, and after, of course, it's just that he's the one that got Andy Kaufman involved in wrestling, possibly, or what. It would not surprise me if After was involved in that.
Yeah. And another special attraction over the years, we saw Gorilla Monsoon go one on one with Ali, Muhammad Ali, the man
Right.
himself. Why don't you tell us
I,
about that and how
I,
that
I
transpired?
and that's it's funny you mentioned that. I just watched that again on last week and everything. And there's a great book out on Gorilla Monsoon by
Brian R.
yeah, sure,
Solomon.
Burke. What's his name? Thank you, thank you. I have senior moments. Yeah, yeah, by
Yeah.
Solomon and everything. Great, great book. 500 pages. Unbelievable. Anyways, uh, that was a total setup, of course, but unbeknownst to the fans, because everything was kayfabe at the time, it was phenomenal. Of course, that was leading up to the Inoki Ali match, but I thought that was great. And if you ever get a chance to watch it, please do, because it adds the suspense of what's going to happen next, which would have been the Ali Inoki match.
And what history can you give us on the 601-pound Haystacks Calhoun?
Well, I never met him per se, even though I have a picture of him someplace at the Springfield Auditorium squeezing into a phone booth that I took. I have to dig it, find that photo, black and white. And I never met the man. I would have liked to. Uh, I, from what I've been told by people, that his persona to the fans was his persona in real life. I don't know if that's true or not.
Okay. Okay. How about legendary photographer George Napolitano?
George, George's a good guy. I like George. He is an advocate of wrestling, of course, but he's also into baseball. Did you know that? He
No, I
does
didn't know
baseball
that.
photography as well. Yeah,
Oh, okay.
and he was a high school teacher. You know, I think he told me he taught math, if I remember right. And but he's good. Yeah, George is a good guy. And of course, he's made a reputation on himself very good. I like George.
Now, there's different ways at looking at it, but if you had to pick four, what would you say is the Mount Rushmore of pro wrestling, any era included?
Oh, geez. Okay, I'm gonna.
And it can be
All right,
personal
I would
favorites.
say, yeah, I'm going to be prejudiced in this here, but I would say Luthez, Danny Hodge, Billy Robinson, and let's see. I would throw in with somebody with a gimmick. I'll say the original Gorgeous George.
There you go. Yeah. All prominent figures in the world of pro
Yeah.
wrestling. Two things that have kind of disappeared in wrestling: enhancement talent. They were very prominent in the wrestling business because they kind of, brought the television stars to the next level and made them shine.
Oh
And
yeah.
another thing is the repetition of house shows. You're wrestling on all the house shows and bettering your craft, and that's kind of gone away too. There are not as many now. What are your thoughts on both of those?
Well, okay. Let's go with enhancement talent. At the Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame, when it was in Amsterdam, George Steele said something, because the term jobber was used by a lot of people, and he had said the correct term is carpenter, not jobber. And I thought, and you stop and think about it. What does a carpenter do? Builds something up. You know, a jobber, if you're thinking of a jobber, is just somebody that is flat out on the mat, 1, 2, 3, it's over. But so the going back to what you said is that the enhancement talent it no longer exists because there's no house shows, and with the current trend in wrestling, because it's become so corporate, you know, they're looking at big venues now. Look at this thing for what WrestleMania. I don't know if it's next year, the year. I guess it's 27. They're going to Saudi Arabia. Is that correct, Joe?
It is, yes.
Yeah,
WrestleMania.
yeah, yeah. And I was how many? Of course, I from what I was told, I don't know. Maybe you can verify this. That the crown prince paid in advance to have the show come over. I don't know if that's true or not. Have you heard
Yes.
that?
Yeah, I've heard the same thing.
Yeah, yeah. So and then the local shows today are done by indie promotions. WWE doesn't come into or AEW doesn't come into a weekly or a monthly venue like they used to, which destroys the element, in my opinion, and it weakens the crew because you
Yeah.
don't have that many wrestlers. You just have enough to get by on that monthly show wherever it is or whatever, and it's on selected arenas. It's not
Right.
a regular base thing.
And you mentioned earlier Ross Hart, a friend of yours. Why don't you tell us about the Hart family and how prominent they have been in the world of wrestling?
Oh, geez. Well, I started a correspondence with. Oh, God. I got. I got to hit that. Oh, sorry.
That's right.
Correspondence with Stu back in the 70s. And Ross took it over. And when he was still in high school. And we've been friends, oh God, I don't know, for years. Ross has been to my house several times. We've traveled around together. I met I met Owen in Cologne, Germany, at an Otto Vance promotion. Otto brought me into the dressing room and says, "Boys, they got the American reporter here, Tom Burke." So I went up to the line, shaking everybody's hand, and I walk into this guy. He's got his head down, blonde hair, and I put my hand. I said, "I'm Tom Burke, sir," and he says, "Yeah, you write to my brother," and he looks up, and I realize that it's Owen Hart, and we hung out together for like 3 days. It was a lot of
Wow.
fun. You know,
And
but
any personal
again,
memories
that
of Owen?
say again.
Any personal memories of Owen? What was he like a human
Oh,
being, you know?
Owen was good. He was funny, you know. Uh, I watched at the last day of the tournament, the morning of the last day. They were heading out to another town in Germany, and I was leaving. I was going. I was at the train station too. I was going from Cologne to Brussels, and so, anyways, they're on the platform. I'm saying goodbye to them, and Owen is standing by the on the train, and he puts his hand out to shake hands again, and he drags me into the train as it starts moving, and then he's laughing, and he throws me off and everything, and that was so funny. But he was a good guy. Good guy. You could have. We had we would travel around locally. There was a Betty Frank and her husband Rolf. uh, were friends with Autovance, and they would travel around. We went to a farm, like a zoological farm in the Cologne area. It was fun. It was good people.
And what can fans expect? If somebody makes a trip to your shrine, what other types of items? You mentioned photos. Obviously, Killer Kowalski's championship belt is there. What other types of items are there?
Oh, postcards, promos. I was into collecting postcards, wrestling postcards of bills of upcoming shows, and these would date back to actually to the 1940s and 30s, and that the promoters would send out to his clients. I have that in two albums. Other paraphernalia, trunks. I have I have two old style trunks. Oh, one of them is from Caravan Hess, and the other one is from Kowalski. And I don't know when you were up here, Joe, if I showed you those, but they were wool.
You did, yes.
And and I'm saying to myself, thinking how these guys wrestled for maybe 40 minutes in the main event, ring lights on, no air conditioning in the venue, you know, and they're beating the shit out of each other,
Right.
and it's just the sweat coming down, and then I take out a more modern trunks that I got from the 1, 2, 3 Kid, Sean Watman,
Oh,
you
yes.
know, and that is like a lyric, you know,
Yeah.
material, very light, you know, and it's just different, And I've said to myself, if these guys today had to wear these wool trunks, how long would they last in the ring? You know,
Right.
4 minutes, they want to be back in the dressing room. Well, they're back in the dressing room 4 minutes already, so
Right.
so it doesn't
Exactly.
matter.
Now, you also have Friar Ferguson's outfit, don't you?
I have Fire Ferguson's, the Friar Franciscan Friar outfit that was given to me on my 50th birthday by my very good friend John Pantosi,
That's
who
excellent.
acquired that from the Friar.
Great piece of history right there. What are your thoughts on Chief Jay Strongbow? Any memories of the chief?
I met Chief twice. The last time I met him was at your event in it wasn't in Providence. It was at the Holy Ghost Social Club. Was
Yes,
that
that was in
right?
East Providence, 2011.
East Providence. Yeah, yeah. I met him there, and then I met him someplace. I met him at a WWE show years ago when he was teaming with White Wolf,
Right.
and but he was sociable. You know, a lot of people have had up and down relationships with him, I guess, but he was all right. I can't complain.
Yeah. We've had some interesting characters, like we mentioned Friar Ferguson. There's been a lot of characters in wrestling. What can you tell us about the Elephant Boy?
Oh, Tony Olivas, my
Yes.
friend. Well, he's got the most interesting history. He was born in Phoenix, Arizona, and before World War II, he was studying to become a Catholic priest. When World War II broke out, he left the seminary and joined the army. While he was in the service, he was stationed in England, getting ready for D-Day invasion. While in the service, he met another GI, Bobby Coleman, who was a wrestler, and they struck up a friendship. And Bobby started training him as a wrestler because they put on some shows for the other GIs. Anyways, D-Day comes. He goes through D-Day. The war ends. Everybody's going back home, but the service keeps him in Europe because he was bilingual. He could speak Italian and he could speak the Spanish and as well as English, of course. Well, anyways, he gets home and he's undecided whether what he should do, if he should go back into seminary or what. So he calls Bobby Coleman, or writes to Bobby Coleman, and Bobby Coleman tells him he was out in California. He was in Arizona. He went to visit Bobby, and he starts wrestling. He goes to Chicago. He meets Jack Pfeffer, and they invent the Elephant Boy gimmick. And then, of course, he teamed with Moolah as the slave girl. So that developed years later. And as the years progressed, things changed. He got out of wrestling. He ended up getting married. He married a lady from Ojai, California. They ended up purchasing a health resort or something of that nature. Anyways, he ended up getting married to her. They were married for about 40 years, something like that. She passes away. In between, he started getting back into the church, even though he never left the church, but he became more active in it and became a deacon. And after his wife passed away, the priest that he was, his parish priest said, "Why don't you consider going back in a seminary?" Because people, I'm too old. He said, "No, let's talk to the bishop." They went talk to the bishop. He got accepted. He became, at that point, the oldest male man in the United States to be ordained as a priest. And he
Oh,
was an
wow.
Augustinian friar, just like our current Pope. Pope Leo is an Augustinian friar. Well, anyways, he was stationed in Ojai, California. He would travel around and do seminars because of his marital status, being a widower and having a son who, sad to say, passed away from cancer. He was already Father Bill was already a priest at the time, and the young man passed away. I think he was like in his 30s or maybe over 40s. Anyways, so he would do seminars for married couples and
Okay.
everything because of his background. So it was phenomenal. And then and then I got him booked. On a Mexican TV show that was this guy. I can't. He was a priest. I was in Mexico, and I'm sorry. He had a TV show on a Spanish network, and he was a Catholic priest. He had this talk show. I contacted him, told him Father Bill, and for Friar Tormenta, the wrestling priest from Mexico. He brought them in, and they were on the TV show that he had with another priest that was from South America that had unusual. He wasn't a wrestler, but he did something else, rodeo or something like that. But it was funny.
And you've traveled all over the world. Is there a particular trip that stands out as your favorite?
Oh, if I could turn the clock back again and do it again, most definitely Germany. In I would say the last time I went in '91 when I met Owen Hart. I'd like to do that again.
Oh, yes. Okay. And in closing, what would you say is your legacy? How do you want to be remembered?
Oh, geez, probably as a guy who was open to everybody. You know, my grandmother always had this saying: "It's not what you are; It's how you are as a person that matters. And that has been my philosophy. I don't care. We live in a society everybody's got labels. You're this, you're that. I don't care if if politically, if you're blue, you're red. If you have a different outlook religiously, sexually, or whatever, that's not my business. I would rather sit down, have a coffee, and chat and talk. And if you're into wrestling, that's even better.
Right.
Just don't ask me who the current WWE champion is. I have no idea.
Start earlier, right? Start earlier.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. Well, Tom, thank you so much. I mean, you've been a true asset to the business. It's an
Thank
honor
you.
to speak with you, and it's an honor to have you here. It's the All Access Entertainment Podcast for Tom Burke. I'm your host, Joseph Bruen, and we will see you guys next time. Don't forget to subscribe and like.